have been some very good physiotherapists in my life. People from whom I learnt a lot, who were friends, whom I totally trusted. They were supportive. They were people I liked. I'll start with when I qualified. I was on a bursary, so I was seconded to Green Lane Hospital in Auckland. I was a bit scared. Miss Hoddy, when we were students, we were a bit scared of Hoddy. She turned out to be one of the most wonderful people, wonderful influences. She seemed older. She was gentle. She was thorough, responsible, very, very good on chest work. We taught, of course, a lot on using the rocker, putting the body in every position for every segment of the lungs and doing the appropriate things. Using the rocker post-operatively if people had a temperature, putting them onto the rocker, getting out that sputum, and the temperature would go down. It was magical. I was part of that magic. And asthma, the asthmatics. She taught us a lot with asthmatics, and also Lois Edward, who was assisting her. She'd done some training at one of the big chest hospitals in England. And Lois Edward, who later moved to the Waikato, she was also very good. And I learnt so much about asthmatics and handling asthmatics and being with them, not being put off by it all, just being quietly confident. Of course, again, all the postural drainage that went with that and exercise and so on. Sheila Glendinning was on the staff, but Sheila came when she wasn't playing golf. She was very, very keen on her golf. So she worked part-time in the non-golf seasons, although later on I believe she became charge physiotherapist there. There's also Nancy Patterson, who married a farmer in the Waikato, and there was Marjorie Goldsmith, now Marjorie Ashworth, a widow in Dunedin. It was a wonderful team for learning, and always learning from Hoddy. We used to work in the TB wards, and I used to wonder why, when I pulled the cubicles round, patients would cry. Because now I'm older, I can see why. They were in very tidy white beds down two sides of a long, long ward. Their beds had to be tidy. And they were young people. They had families. And they had to wait until they'd had 3 months with negative sputum tests. And the anxiety waiting for the third one, and the disappointment when they didn't. But it would have untidied the ward if anyone cried. But come, a young naive physio pulls the curtains round, and they cried. And I said this once to some of my colleagues, only recent years, and another one said, I used to wonder why they always cried. There were young women there having horrific operations. One, there was a growth right where the bronchi joined the trachea. They had to take one lung out and use that bronchus to join the gap between the trachea and the other bronchus. A huge, huge operation. These young girls. So one was learning a lot. Now, the lovely thing about Hoddy was that she was willing to keep in touch, and I kept in touch with her for many years. Perhaps I should mention, at Green Lane there were also two very special surgeons, Dr. Rowan Nix and Dr. Douglas Robb, who eventually became president of the BMA. They were very special. If they saw you walking to work, they'd give you a ride in the car, they talked. And they treated us as friends, as part of the team. We were allowed to go in and watch operations. Again, I remember seeing the first operation where a person had totally black lungs, white person. I hadn't seen the effect of smoking on lungs before. I'd only seen operations with pink lungs. So these men were wonderful. You felt as though you were part of a team, as though you were wanted. There was a little baby that had to have, I think his gut wasn't joined. Oh no, perhaps it was his trachea not joined. He had a terrible, big operation at birth. He was in a single room, and of course there were glasses you could see in the windows, and there were always special nurses there. And I saw one old man leading another old man up to that window and saying, "Come and look at our baby." A year later, there was a bouncing little naughty boy with red curly hair in the ward. It was that little baby who'd come back for a checkup. So we were seeing miracles. It was the early days of so much of the surgery, early days of some of the heart surgery. It was a wonderful 2 years learning. And Hoddy I kept in touch with for years. If ever I was in Auckland, I'd go and see her. One day, Bruce and I went to visit her when she was retired, living out near Howick, Cockle Bay, and she had her little house. It was on the side of a hill. We had 4 children, and she had ice cream and strawberries for them. But our horrible little children were convinced that there was a witch living under her house. I don't know why children think this. Then I last saw Hoddy after she had had a stroke and was in care. And she was still her same self, being totally responsible for herself, writing a diary, saying to me, I can't talk, I've got to be down for dinner at such and such. And I went down to the dining room and said goodbye, and I didn't see her again. But one of her influences to me that I remember, she said to me, Miss Davis, you are not seeing a shoulder at 11 o'clock. You are seeing Mrs. Smith, who has a damaged shoulder at 11 o'clock. And it always stayed with me that I am seeing a person first, a condition second. So thank you, Hoddy. Now, the next 2 people I want to mention are people, all these people have died, sadly. Dorothy Gordon and Ros Ham. Very, very special people to me. They were leaders of physiotherapy in Wellington, and I worked with them on the education committee that moved the education of physiotherapy into the University of Otago. That will be talked about later. In Christchurch, a very special person was Joan Durbridge. She was charged in Christchurch for a long time. I didn't really work there much. I think it was my childbearing years, and by the time I did go back to work, she retired fairly soon after. But she was always supportive to me, and when she was an older lady, I used to visit her sometimes for a cup of tea. And she was always supportive of my ideas. She always said, keep on doing what you're doing. She always treated me as a proper physiotherapist. She could see the need for research, for things to move ahead, for things to be done differently. So I think she was a leader. And then in Dunedin, Grace Wilson. I'd known Grace for quite a long time, but I'd never really got to know her until those years when I was having so much trouble in Dunedin doing my PhD. And she became closer and closer to me. I would so often have lunch with her, and she was totally supportive because she knew the personnel in Otago. She knew the people I was dealing with. And she was a lot of fun, actually. And once I got to know her, she was so special. And in fact, I think she was seconded quite a bit to the anatomy department. She knew Gareth Jones, and I think she was telling Gareth Jones I was worthwhile. So sadly, Grace died before I'd finished my PhD, but thank you, Grace. Of course, there have been other physiotherapists, many of whom are personal friends and so on, but these 5 people have all been very special, and I totally honour their memory.